I was so excited about that. And I remember running to my dad and saying, look, I can make a spin. He said, oh, stop it. You look like a prostitute. And I remember those, first of all, I didn't even know what a prostitute was. But I knew that it was something that wasn't good. And so the abuse and things that took place in that house, the words that was said, really set the stage for what happened next in my life. As I became a teen, was very promiscuous. And then I wound up having a son to take care of him. I became a prostitute. And but before that, even when I was in school, I was always an honor roll student. I wasn't gifted and talented. I always was very smart. And, even with the stories I tell you and the creative being. But as a teen in my adolescence, I was destructive with my body and my spirit because I didn't care about myself because my dad didn't care about me. And that his role as a father was to help to define who I am as a woman, who I would be as a woman or a young woman. So from there, one day I made a decision I was driving, going on a call, going to drop my son off, and he said he wanted to be a preacher. And I remember thinking, how is he going to be a preacher when I'm far away from him? I'm far away from God. I don't even know anything about God to teach him. So I decided to go to the church that day. It was a Wednesday night, and that's how my life changed. From there, I got my associate's degree, then my bachelor's degree. And then when I first got my associate's degree, I thought, wow, I'm really smart. I want to be on the dean's list, become an SGA president, and all these things, great things were happening. And it started to build up my confidence in my own ability of who I was originally before the abuse, of who God created me to be. So it was just, it was a great time for me. And I really started going to the church and just learning more about myself and raising my son. And then I got my bachelor's. That was cool. And then I thought to myself, well, if I'm smart enough to get my bachelor's, maybe I get my master's degree. So then that's when I went to Oregon and got my master's in international management. I went all the way out to Oregon because that was the only school at the time that was teaching Chinese. And I wanted to learn Chinese because my field was international business. So I went out to Oregon with my son as a single mom. And as I was out there, that's when I landed the job with Nike. And then I was hired. I moved up pretty quick, and I wound up managing the footwear account for Southeast Asia. And so I was one of the developers for the releasing product into the Southeast Asian market. And so it's just interesting to see how, as I was born into this being that was creative, bright eyes and ideas, then life happens in a terrible way. It darkens my path, but then a word from my son, something snapped in my mind, and I thought to myself, I want to change. And that change led to this wonderful experience ahead of me.
Oh, Ateba. If your story was only that you came from that type of a background and your life went through the difficulty that you've related, and then you ended up getting educated, and then you ended up getting a very high-level job with an international company with a lot of responsibility, then the theme of the show would be, just because you come from a hardship background doesn't mean that you can't be successful. And so that's clearly, that's motivational in itself to see that you rose above all that you talked about to become a wonderful, productive person in society. But that's just the beginning of what your story is. Mm-hmm. But what I want people to understand is what you're doing with yourself now. Mm-hmm. And you've started to talk about why you're motivated to do certain things. But the first part that you've shared beautifully, and I thank you for what you've spoken to, you've shown that just because a person's had a rough background doesn't mean they can't turn their life around. But you've also introduced your life got really turned around when you met God.
Yeah.
And so that's an incredible testimony. Before I go into some of the incredible things that you've done with your life other than the bit that you've told us, mm-hmm. Is there more that you'd like to share at all with how God turned your life around and where you are with? Now, you talked about your son, but you have 2 kids, don't you?
Yes. So during, while out in in Oregon. I wind up, well, before that, I lived in Virginia for a bit before I moved to Oregon. And I met my husband, my ex-husband, and we got married. And I met him through the church. And that experience itself was a testimony to meet him and to, and for God to allow that unity to happen. And through that, we have two great kids, Jewel and then Jeremiah, and then I have another son named Hezekiah. So that was a wonderful experience. But even through that part was really dark as well, because there was challenges in the marriage. I thought when I went into the marriage that it was supposed to be this particular way, because okay, now he's saved, I'm saved, so this is going to be easy. This thing is going to be easy. Like, then no more broken families for me, no more, none of that. This is going to be easy because we both, love God. But that wasn't the situation. And so that really shook me up. And it shook me up in a way that I after my experience and I got saved and I saw the things that God was doing in my life and gave me this wonderful job and this wonderful husband, my faith in God was very strong. But through the trials, my faith in God began to be tested. And I wind up being in a situation that my marriage was lost. And I didn't expect that to happen to me, but it did. And so that was heartbreaking. It really hurt, that happened. And it was a decision that I made to walk away from it because it wasn't healthy. And I winded up having a stroke, and minor stroke. And I think that was the point when I realized I had to make some decisions in my life to create a more healthy life for myself and for my children. But to go back a little bit, while I was married, I did have the privilege to have an opportunity to create a nonprofit. So let's go back a little bit more. So once I left Nike, I moved to Virginia, and I became a professor at a university for 5 years. And I did really well at that university. I was voted best faculty advisor. I was, took 2 groups of students to China, brought them to the Nike campus. We did, who gets to visit the Nike campus? We did a lot of amazing things. And so the last year, the 5th year, I was waiting for my contract to be renewed, and 700 Club wanted to share my testimony about me being have my past of being a prostitute, and now that I'm a professor. And there was a situation where I thought, I'm going to let my dean know, this is what's going on, because I want him to know, because 700 Club is very popular. And then he was like, oh, that's no problem. He said, no, I'm sorry, let my chair know. And my chair said, oh, that's no problem. Well, let me let the dean know. Well, when I had the meeting with the dean, I thought, oh, she's going to be happy because, she's going to be happy for me. That wasn't the case. She gave me an ultimatum. She said that if I shared my story, that my contract was not going to be renewed. And I remember trying to get her to see what I saw, that this was a rocky story. And this is like how someone started from this position, then fought through all that darkness and arrived to this point in time that I stand here at this institution when I was at a really dark area in my life, an area that was not my choice. It was not my fault that I was molested. It was not my fault because of the environment that I grew up. It was not my fault that I was called a prostitute. And I framed that to say, and then I wind up becoming one. It was my choice that I chose that life, but it's because of that negative thinking. I didn't know who I was, and I was not. So I just thought to myself, I'm going to share my testimony. So I remember she gave me her house number, her cell number, her personal number. I never had a personal number, and she told me to think about it. And I remember going to the mall, and I sat down at the mall on a bench, and I thought to myself, I said, I asked God a long time ago that the molestation, the things that happened to me, that I didn't want it to just happen for no reason. I wanted to be, if it happens, okay, it happens, but allow me, God, to use my story to see other miracles happen in other people's lives, to let people know that just because you're in that circumstance doesn't mean that's where you have to stay. There's still more to come for your life. I wanted to share my story. I wanted to own my story. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to share my story and all that happened and how God transformed my life. So I remember calling and I said, I'm going to share my story. And she said, okay. And then what happened after that, my contract wasn't renewed. And so it was a difficult thing, but it was a blessing because I remember thinking, and then at that time, my marriage was in separation. We had just lost our car, our house, like everything was falling apart. It was like the modern day Jobed. And I remember going to the counselor and she saying, T, oh my gosh, usually people come in here, one thing or two things happen to you, but all these things have happened to you. And she said, you're still standing, and she knew me. She knew that because some people in the church said, well, what did you do for all that to happen? I didn't do anything. Like I was really praising God and I was really serving God. And so she said, Tiba, I know you. I know it was nothing you did. It was something that God allowed to do for a reason. She said, I can't tell you why, but it's for a reason.
Whoa.
So, yeah. So
let me just do this really quick. I'm going to repeat James 1, 2 through 4, because I read it earlier. You said it's your favorite scripture is James. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. James 1 verse 12. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. I want to just get right into something right now. What you said is that you had to live your truth. You could not change your life story to accommodate people that were image conscious, that didn't want to have some kind of a involvement with someone that they thought was not the type of person.
Thought I was dirty. She said it. She said that it's a dirty thing. You don't want to. That's going to affect our money, our donations. Our donors are not going to want to give the university that had an ex-prostitute staff.
For those people that are listening, I just want to make a statement. This is my 145th show, and I like to think that the truth stays the same for me too. And here's what I'm going to tell you. Anybody that's living a real life, not a fake life, not a lie. You've got to get to know yourself. You can't change the past. We didn't have choice sometimes how our past unfolded. And if we made some decisions later in life that were wrong decisions, that's primarily because of the way that we were brought into this world. In other words, a lot of people have to get from today to tomorrow, and they don't know any other way than just the survival kind of a mode, and they do whatever they have to do. But I want to tell you that the people, like the person that was I guess it was the dean that made you resign or terminated you, whatever we called it.
You didn't renew my contract.
Yeah, but let me just tell you something. I've dealt with that type of a mentality my whole life also, because I'm not exactly your cookie cutter type of a image person. People call me a little bit unorthodox. But here's what I'm going to say. The ways of the world are not the ways of the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. And if we just all know that and are honest and truthful and we are forgiven. See, that's the whole thing that Christ did on that cross for us, is that we've been forgiven. It doesn't matter what we might have been before. And if a person wants to throw a fresh coat of paint over some of the truth that we are, then we can't go along with that. And so what I want to say to everybody that's gone through a lot of hardship, a lot of people that have perhaps come out of prison, incarceration, that are trying to get their lives straight, that are having a hard time, do not let go of the truth. Know that what you've been through happened, that you've been forgiven, and now prepare yourself for the next part of the life that you want to go out and embrace. But be honest. You can't. It happened. That's it. I want to read this. I want to get into your nonprofit. This is a press release from last September for an event that you did that you sent me. It was called No Outlet. Truth Entrepreneurship Center set to offer a way out of violence and